He kept smiling for the cameras, but his fingers wouldn't stop shaking under the table. She kept laughing at the host's jokes, but every time his shoulder brushed hers, a memory she had locked away came rushing back. Part 1, the seat next to her. The studio lights were hotter than he remembered. He had done this show a dozen times before, walked out to the same roaring applause, waved the same shy wave, given the same careful answers. But tonight felt different from the moment the stagehand whispered, "You'll be sharing the couch." He followed the pointing finger and saw her, Alexandra, already seated, silver hair glowing under the lights, dress sparkling like a night sky he had once tried to paint with her. For a second, his steps slowed. His body wanted to turn back through the curtain, but the sound of the audience pulled him forward. He walked to the couch with that familiar, gentle half-smile, the one fans loved because it made him seem calm and unshakable. Inside, his chest was a fist. Years had passed since they had stood in the same room, much less sat shoulder to shoulder on national television. He remembered the last time they'd spoken in private. No cameras, no host, just a quiet kitchen, a cold cup of coffee, and two people choosing distance over the risk of breaking each other. He remembered her voice trembling as she said, "You need to chase your light. I'll only slow you down." He had stayed silent then, thinking he was being kind. Tonight, he already knew silence would not save him. Alexandra felt him sit down, the cushion dipping between them. She turned and met his eyes with a practiced brightness, the kind people wear after they've taught themselves to survive without the person they once thought they needed. "Hey, stranger," she said softly, barely moving her lips. The host talked over them, winding up the crowd, but for a heartbeat, the noise blurred. The two of them were back in that old art studio, paint on their hands, the windows open, arguing about whether vulnerability was a strength or a weakness. He had told her then, "For me, it's both." She had smiled, saying, "Then learn how to hold both without dropping yourself." The cameras focused on them, and the host leaned in with a grin. "Tonight we have something special, two people the world loves together again." The audience whistled and clapped, some fans already holding their phones up, streaming every twitch of their faces. Keanu gave a little nod, his public mask sliding neatly into place. But Alexandra noticed the way his jaw tensed just before his smile formed, the tiny hesitation that no one else would see. She had always been the one who saw the details in him. How he pressed his tongue to the back of his teeth when he was thinking too hard, how he'd stare at the floor for exactly 3 seconds before admitting he was hurt. That familiarity was its own kind of ache. The questions started simple. New movie, old roles, favorite stunt gone wrong. He answered with quiet humor, and the audience laughed in all the right places. When the host turned to Alexandra, she spoke about her art, about the foundation they had once started together, about turning grief into color. Her words were calm, but there was a steadiness in her voice that hadn't been there years ago, a new confidence that made him proud and guilty at the same time. He had left her, yet she had grown. Part of him wondered if his absence had given her the space she needed, and that thought hurt most of all. As they talked, memories slipped between their sentences like shadows. The night they stayed up until dawn at a cheap diner, sketching ideas on napkins. The time she showed up on his birthday with a half-finished painting and said, "I don't know how it ends yet. Maybe you do." The argument where he had finally raised his voice, shouting that he didn't know how to be both the man the world wanted and the man she deserved. She had gone quiet then, and in the silence that followed, something precious had cracked. They had never really found a way to fix it. They had only learned how to walk away without looking back. Until tonight. The host, sensing the chemistry the whole room could feel, leaned forward with a mischievous glint. "You two have a history together," he said, drawing out the word history just long enough for the audience to laugh and murmur. "People still talk about your partnership, your connection. It was intense. Then one day it was just gone. No explanation, nothing. So tell us, what happened?" Keanu shifted, suddenly aware of every microphone pointed at him, every camera's red light burning into his skin. This was the question he had dodged for years, wrapped in vague phrases like "life took us different directions, and we're both just busy." But sitting next to her again, breathing the same rehearsed studio air, he felt something different, the sharp, surprising urge to stop hiding. Not for the audience, not for a headline, but for her. For the way her hands folded in her lap now, fingers laced tightly, the only sign she was bracing herself. Alexandra looked straight ahead, a polite smile frozen on her lips. She knew what he usually did, deflect, joke, move on. She had prepared herself for that, told herself it wouldn't sting. But as the silence stretched a heartbeat too long, she sensed a shift. He wasn't laughing it off. He wasn't changing the subject. His shoulders had dropped just a fraction, and his eyes, when he finally turned to her, were not the eyes of a movie star performing for an audience. They were the eyes of the man who once whispered, "I don't know how to do this, but I want to try." He drew in a breath the microphones caught, a soft, human sound that reached even the people in the back rows. Somewhere deep in his chest, an old fear rose, the fear of being misunderstood, of saying the wrong thing, of hurting her again. But right behind that fear was something steadier, something that had survived the years of distance, a quiet, stubborn love that had always taken the shape of respect. He realized with a sudden clarity that almost scared him that this was not about saving his image. It was about giving her the truth she had deserved a long time ago. His hand flexed once on his knee, a small, nervous gesture. The host leaned closer, expectations high, the crowd hushed. Alexandra finally turned her head and met his gaze, eyes asking a silent question he could almost hear. "Are you really going to open this door here?" He swallowed, the lights blazing down, and parted his lips to answer. The first word trembled at the edge of his tongue. And then, from somewhere off stage, a producer suddenly stepped forward, waving a bright red card and cutting across the moment as the host exclaimed, "We have to go to a quick break. Don't move, everyone. You'll want to hear this when we come back." The music blasted, the audience erupted, and the world watched as the most important words he had ever tried to say were forced back down for now. He stared straight ahead at the blinking applause sign, but all he could really see was the way her eyes had widened when he'd almost spoken. She gripped the edge of the couch, feeling the phantom weight of the sentence he had tried to start, and then swallowed. Part 2, the break between them. The band launched into a loud, cheerful riff as the show cut to commercial. Studio assistants poured onto the stage with the efficiency of people used to fixing everything in 60 seconds. Someone touched up Alexandra's powder. Someone adjusted Keanu's jacket. The host leaned over with a quick, reassuring grin and said, "This is great TV, guys. When we come back, let's really get into it," before a handler pulled him away. The crowd buzzed, half seated, half standing, trying to take photos, shouting his name. It was chaos, the manufactured kind that hides the thin line between performance and reality. Inside that noise, a small, private silence formed between them. Alexandra didn't look at him at first. She watched the floor instead, following the swirl of someone's shadow as they carried a camera cable past their feet. She could feel the old instinct rising, to protect him, to smooth the moment over, to tell a comforting half-truth that would let him escape. That had been their pattern. She absorbed the impact, he carried the guilt. It had taken years of therapy and lonely evenings to realize that this wasn't kindness. It was self-erasure. Tonight, she had promised herself something different. She would not disappear for his comfort. Not again. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly, his voice lost under the band for anyone more than a few feet away. She heard more in the question than those 3 words. "Are you furious? Are you scared? Did I just drag you back into a story you worked so hard to leave behind?" She lifted her eyes to him, searching his face. Up close, under the unforgiving studio lights, he didn't look untouchable. There were tiny lines at the corners of his eyes she didn't remember, a tiredness around his mouth that fame could not hide. He looked like a man who had learned the cost of being everyone's hope and no one's burden. She felt something soften in her chest, but she held her ground. "I'm not sure yet," she answered. Her voice came out low, steady. "Depends on what you say when they come back." He flinched just a little, but there was no anger in his expression, only an acceptance that she had the right to that boundary. That was new. The man she'd known years ago had been kind, generous, but constantly apologizing for his own existence, so eager not to hurt anyone that he ended up never saying what he truly felt. That version of him would have already started apologizing, promising safer answers, deflecting the blame onto vague fate. The man sitting next to her now simply nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. "I've been rehearsing the wrong lines for years," he murmured, eyes dropping to his hands. "Always the ones that made it easier for everyone else. I'm tired of that." His honesty hit her unexpectedly hard. For a brief moment, she remembered the earliest days before red carpets and gossip sites, when they were just two unknown people trying to turn pain into something that mattered. His courage then had never been about stunts or crowds. It had been in the way he kept showing up emotionally, even when he had no idea how to fix anything. Somewhere along the way, that part of him had been buried under other people's expectations. To hear it again now, in such a high-risk moment, twisted something inside her. A stagehand counted down with their fingers, 30 seconds. The host was back in place, shuffling his note cards, glancing up at them with the bright calculation of a man who smelled viral content. The audience settled into their seats, murmurs fading into a collective hush. In that narrowing window of privacy, Alexandra had to make a choice. She could protect them both with one simple suggestion. Let's just say we grew apart and laugh it off. She could end the tension, guard their privacy, and step back into the safe gray silence where no one knew what they had really meant to each other or how badly they had broken. It would be familiar, comfortable. It would also be a quiet betrayal of everything she had learned about herself since leaving. She turned slightly toward him so the cameras wouldn't see her lips move when they came back up. "If you tell the truth," she said softly, "don't tell it like I was the one who walked away because I didn't care. I cared so much it almost killed me." His head snapped up, eyes locking onto hers. For a moment, her own bravery startled her. That sentence had taken her years to admit even in her journal, written alone in the middle of the night. Saying it now, within seconds of going live, was a leap without a safety net. But that was the thing about resilience she had discovered. It wasn't about feeling no fear. It was about doing the right thing while your hands still shook. 20 seconds. He swallowed. "I know," he said quietly, and there was no hesitation, no defensive edge. "That's exactly what I need to fix." He paused, as if tasting his next words before committing to them. "If I say it wrong, if I hurt you again, stop me. On camera, don't protect me this time." Her breath caught. This was not the man the tabloids had invented, not the aloof legend fans worshipped from a distance. This was just a person, flawed and trying, asking her to hold him accountable in front of the world. A memory flashed, him standing in her doorway years ago, backpack on one shoulder, saying, "I'll get better at this, I promise," but never explaining what this really meant. She had waited months for that promise to become something solid. It never had. For the first time, she saw him trying to make good on it. 10 seconds. The host looked up at the main camera, smile locked in place. "We're back in 5-4. The band fell into a light, anticipatory drum roll. The studio air shifted, growing dense with expectation. Alexandra felt her heart hammering against her ribs, each beat echoing a warning, "You are not ready." But beneath that fear, another voice spoke up, quieter but stronger. "If not now, when?" "Whatever you're about to say," she whispered, the seconds bleeding away, "say it like you're talking to me, not them." She tilted her head toward the dark sea of cameras and blinking lights. "Forget the world, just don't forget me this time." The red ON Air sign flared back to life. The host beamed at the camera with a practiced gush. "Welcome back. Before the break, we were about to get into something real. You could feel it, right?" The audience applauded on cue, some of them already leaning forward, sensing something rare about to unfold. He turned to Keanu with a teasing yet intrigued look. "So, you were about to tell us what really happened between you two. The truth, finally." The camera zoomed in. Millions of people on couches at home, in bars, on their phones, in bed, leaned closer without even realizing it. Next to him, Alexandra sat perfectly still, her hands no longer clenched but resting on her knees open, as if bracing for either a blow or a blessing. Keanu inhaled slowly. He could feel 50 different scripts pressing against his tongue, publicist-approved lines, easy jokes, safe half-truths. But for once he let them all fall away. He remembered what she had asked, "Talk to me, not them." So he turned fully and looked at her instead of the camera. The host blinked, caught off guard by the intimacy of the gesture. The room seemed to tighten around them, the way sound softens just before a crash. "Alex," he began, voice unsteady but clear, "the truth is..." Across the stage, a nervous young assistant, eyes fixed on a malfunctioning monitor, accidentally unplugged a cable. For a single, surreal second, every screen in the control room went black and the director shouted, "Hold, hold, do not lose this moment," as the live feed flickered, sputtered, and then came back just as he finished his first sentence, leaving millions of viewers with the haunting sense they had just missed the most important word. Alexandra stared at him, stunned by whatever he had said in that brief, glitch-swallowed heartbeat. Words the home audience had not heard at all. And as the host recovered with a nervous laugh, pretending nothing had gone wrong, she realized with a tremor that what he had just confessed might change everything, whether the world was ready to hear it or not. He didn't look at the cameras when the feed came back. He didn't even seem to notice the confusion on the crew's faces. His eyes stayed on her, as if he were afraid that if he looked away, the courage that had finally surfaced would slip back into hiding. She was still processing the sentence he just whispered through the static, a confession the audience had missed, but that hit her like a physical force. The truth is, I never stopped loving you. Part 3, the confession no one heard. For a moment she couldn't speak. Her throat went tight and the studio blurred. The world believed this was light entertainment, a nostalgic reunion for late-night laughs. But he had just thrown a match into dry, forgotten ground, and she could feel the heat spreading through everything she thought had cooled to ash. Her instinct warred with itself. Part of her wanted to shut it down, to protect the fragile balance she had built without him. The steady rhythm of her work, the self-respect hard-won in quiet therapy rooms, the new boundaries that had cost her sleepless nights to learn. Another part, the one that still woke up feeling his absence on the other side of the bed even after years alone, leaned toward him with raw, unguarded hope. The host, oblivious to what the viewers had missed but alert to the charged silence, tried to steer things back into something he could control. Okay, he said with a laugh that didn't quite hide his curiosity. We had a tiny technical hiccup there. Live TV, folks, but we are all ears. You two clearly have a lot of history. What do you want people to understand about it? Keanu took another breath, the kind you take right before you jump from a ledge with no guarantee of where you'll land. His fingers tapped lightly against his knee, a quiet rhythm of nerves. I want them to understand, he began slowly, that sometimes the person you push away is the one you are trying hardest to protect. He turned back to Alexandra, voice softening. And that doesn't make it right, it just makes it complicated. The audience murmured, drawn in by the vulnerability. This wasn't polished, it wasn't a press tour anecdote. It was messy, halting, human. Alexandra listened carefully, weighing every word against the years they'd lost. She remembered his old habits, how he used to frame every confession as an apology, how he'd wrap his pain in jokes so no one would think he was a burden. But this time, his voice had a different center, quieter yet firmer, like someone who had finally accepted that telling the truth was not violence but respect. I was drowning back then, he continued, gaze drifting upward for a second as if he could see the old him hanging in the rafters. Everyone wanted something from me, a performance, a quote, a version of me they could carry home. You were the only person who didn't ask for anything except honesty, and I didn't know how to give that without feeling like I'd disappoint you. He paused, swallowing. So instead of being weak in front of you, I chose to be absent. I told myself I was sparing you from my mess. The truth is, I was just afraid you'd see how fragile I really was. That last sentence pressed against all her old scars. In the early days, she had begged him to show her his cracks, convinced that the only way to love someone fully was to love their brokenness too. He had smiled, changed the subject, kissed her forehead, and gone back to pretending that his quiet sadness was just a quirk, not a wound. When he started missing calls, rescheduling dinners, answering her messages with tight little "I'm fine, just busy," she had believed him. Until the distance became its own language. Sitting beside him now, hearing him say plainly what he had never admitted, a strange mix of anger and compassion rose in her chest. The host sensed the gravity and, to his credit, didn't cut away. So you walked away because you were scared, he summarized, eyes flicking between them. Do you regret it? It was the kind of oversimplified question that made for good TV, but for once the answer wasn't simple at all. Keanu looked down at his hands, then back at Alexandra. I regret hurting you, he said. I regret not being brave enough to tell you the truth when it mattered. I regret making you feel like you were something I outgrew when the reality was I didn't feel like I deserved to stand next to you. He let out a humorless, self-aware breath. People kept calling me a hero, and I couldn't even be honest with the one person who actually knew me. The crowd was utterly silent now, the kind of silence that happens when people forget they're part of a show and start feeling like they're overhearing something sacred. Alexandra's heart clenched. Here it was, The humility she always sensed in him, now stripped of self-pity and offered instead as an admission of responsibility. It was what she had needed years ago, the missing piece that might have changed everything. But time had left its mark. She was not the same woman who would have thrown herself into his arms after hearing it. She was stronger now, but also more careful. "Regret isn't the same as repair," she said, her voice calm but edged with years of quiet pain. "You regret it. I lived it." Her words landed gently but firmly, like a boundary placed with love rather than spite. "I lost you and had to rebuild my life from the ground up, wondering why I wasn't worth the truth." A soft gasp moved through the audience. The host shifted, realizing this was no longer just his show, it had become a reckoning. Keanu nodded slowly, taking in her words without flinching away. "You were worth the truth," he replied. "You were worth a version of me I didn't know how to be. That's on me, not you." For the first time, she saw it clearly. He wasn't asking for her to erase the past. He wasn't even asking for forgiveness yet. He was just accepting blame without argument. Something inside her loosened at that. Kindness, she knew now, wasn't always saying yes. Sometimes it was offering someone the dignity of facing what they'd done without you glossing it over. The host, almost whispering now, tried again. "So, if you had the chance to say one thing to her that you didn't say back then, what would it be?" Alexandra's chest tightened. This was dangerous ground. A part of her wanted to roll her eyes, make a joke, deflate the intensity. But another part recognized the strange, unexpected gift of this moment. A global stage being turned into a tiny, intimate room where two people could finally say what needed to be said. She took a slow breath, steadied herself, and waited. Keanu turned his body fully toward her, ignoring the cameras, the audience, the millions watching. His voice lowered, rough around the edges. "I would have told you that I loved you in a way that scared me," he said. "That every time you walked into a room, I felt something I didn't think I deserved. I would have told you that your art made me want to be braver, and that scared me too, because bravery meant changing, and I was terrified of failing in front of you." He paused, searching her face, his own eyes bright with unspent tears. "I would have told you that leaving wasn't proof I didn't care. It was proof I didn't know how to stay." Her eyes burned. These were the words she had begged the universe for in the quiet dark for so long. She had imagined this conversation 100 different ways, angry, tearful, dramatic. But she had never pictured it happening under studio lights with strangers a few feet away holding their breath. The surrealness of it almost made her laugh. Instead, she exhaled slowly, pushing through the swirl of emotion to find her center. "Do you know," she said softly, "how many nights I sat alone wondering what I'd done wrong, wondering if I wasn't enough, too intense, too honest, too much?" She shook her head, a sad smile touching her lips. "I gave you every unpolished part of me, and when you left, I decided that must have been my mistake." She leaned forward a little, her voice gaining strength. "It took me years to learn that my too much was exactly what made my life mine, that my vulnerability wasn't the problem. Your fear was." His shoulders sagged with the weight of her truth, but there was admiration in his gaze, too. "You're right," he said. "You were brave, and I was not. You were real, and I was performing, even in our kitchen. You walked into the fire. I watched from a distance and called it love." The host, for once, didn't interrupt. He simply watched, eyes shining, as if he'd forgotten the show had sponsors and time limits. The audience remained silent, hanging on every syllable. This wasn't just about two famous people anymore. It was about every regret sitting unspoken in every viewer's chest. Alexandra took in his words and felt something unexpected stirring beneath the ache. Respect. It took courage to admit all of this publicly, to strip away the myth of perfection and expose the flawed, frightened man underneath. He was finally doing what she had always wanted from him, standing in the open, without armor, willing to be seen as imperfect. "Why now?" she asked quietly, the question that had been beating inside her from the moment he sat down. "Why say all of this now, on a stage, instead of years ago when it could have changed us?" He hesitated, then answered with unvarnished honesty. "Because I finally realized that avoiding pain was costing me my life," he said. "I kept choosing comfort over truth. I watched you from far away, your exhibitions, your talks, the work you were doing with kids who'd lost everything, and I saw someone who turned pain into something beautiful instead of hiding from it. I wanted to be that brave, and I knew I couldn't start without coming back to the place I'd run from, you." Her breath trembled. For so long she had thought he wasn't watching, that he had moved on to brighter, easier things. To know he'd seen her quietly from the shadows that complicated everything. Kindness tugged at her, but so did self-protection. She could feel the old dynamic trying to pull her back in, him broken, her healing him, losing herself in the process. She refused to repeat that story, no matter how much her heart leaned toward him. "You don't get to make me your redemption arc," she said gently but firmly. "My life isn't a lesson you needed to learn." He nodded quickly, almost before she finished. "I know," he replied. "I'm not asking you to fix me. I'm not asking you for anything, actually. Just the chance to stop lying by omission. To say in front of you and everyone that I was wrong, that your love was never the problem, my fear was, and that I've spent years trying to become someone who doesn't run from the people who see him clearly." A deep quiet settled over the room, softer than the earlier tension. This was a different kind of silence, the kind that follows a hard truth finally spoken. Alexandra felt the knot in her chest loosen another notch. The courage, the humility, the willingness to own his failures without demanding forgiveness. It wasn't nothing. It was, in its own broken way, an act of love. The host cleared his throat, his voice a little hoarse. Wow," he said, genuinely thrown. "I think everyone here feels like they just watched something real." He looked into the camera. "I'm guessing there are a lot of people at home thinking about their own Alexandras and Keenis right now." The crowd gave a soft, almost reverent laugh. Then he turned back to her. "Alexandra, after everything you've just heard, do you think there's a path forward for you too, even as friends, or is this closure?" Every eye in the room landed on her. The old Alexandra might have rushed to reassure everyone, to rescue him from awkwardness, to say something gentle and vague like, "We'll see," just to ease the pressure. The new Alexandra sat with the question, letting it settle. Her heart pounded. A lifetime of history, hurt, tenderness, and unspoken hope pressed in on her at once. She looked at him, really looked, and saw not the icon the world adored, but the man who had once fallen asleep in a paint-splattered chair in her studio, who had cried silently at a small funeral where they were the last to leave, who had now chosen to risk his carefully guarded image to tell her the truth at last. He had been deeply flawed. He had also, in his own stumbling way, always tried to be kind. She drew in a slow breath, feeling the weight of every possible answer. "I don't know yet," she said finally, each word deliberate. "But I know this, whatever happens next, it has to be honest. No more protecting each other with silence, no more disappearing when it gets hard." Her gaze didn't waver. "If there's any path forward, it has to be built on that." The host leaned in, sensing another moment. "And are you willing to take that first step tonight?" he asked. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, a voice from the front row called out, shaking with emotion, "Please say yes. Some of us need to believe it's not too late." The audience turned, startled. A young woman stood there, clutching a worn photograph in her fist, tears running freely down her face. Security moved toward her out of habit, but the pain in her voice made the whole room freeze. Alexandra's answer died on her lips as she looked at the stranger, and in that instant she understood. Their story had just stopped being only theirs. And what the young woman was about to reveal would force both of them to reevaluate everything they thought this night was supposed to be. He turned toward the voice, startled, and Alexandra did too. The studio, a second ago focused only on the two of them, pivoted like a living organism. Cameras swung, lights shifted, and suddenly all eyes were on the young woman in the front row who had dared to break the invisible wall between audience and stage. Her hand shook around the worn photograph she clutched, knuckles white, as if it were the only thing anchoring her to the ground. Part 4, the moment that belonged to everyone. The host lifted a calming hand toward security. "It's okay," he said, reading the room. "Let her speak." There was something in the woman's face, raw, unfiltered grief, that made interrupting her feel almost cruel. The band fell silent. The buzzing cameras, the stage crew, even the restless crowd quieted around her like ripples receding from a stone dropped into deep water. She swallowed, eyes flicking between Alexandra and Keanu. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice cracking. "I know this is your moment, I couldn't stay quiet." She took a wavering breath. "You two talking about fear, regret, telling the truth too late. I'm living that right now." Alexandra leaned forward slightly, her whole attention on the woman. The empathy that had once nearly drowned her was still there, but now it felt steadier, like something she had learned how to carry. "What's your name?" she asked gently. "Maria," the woman whispered. "I flew here from Miami. My dad and we watched your movies together," she said, glancing at Keanu, then back at Alexandra. "And we followed your work," she added to Alexandra, her voice softening. "My dad loved your art, said you painted the things he couldn't say." She held up the photograph, the edges frayed. From the stage, they could see it was an older man in a hospital bed, smiling weakly at the camera, a notebook resting on his lap. Maria's hand trembled as she continued. "We had a fight. A stupid one. I told him I was too busy to visit that week. He said, 'Life is short, Mija,' and I snapped back, 'You always say that, I'll come next month.'" Her throat closed for a second. "He died 3 days later, no warning, no chance to say I'm sorry, no chance to say thank you." She blinked hard, tears falling freely now. "I've been living with this guilt, this unfinished story, and hearing you," she looked at Keanu and Alexandra, eyes shining. "Hearing you finally say the things you didn't say when you had the chance, I needed to know. Is it ever too late to tell the truth, or to forgive someone who can't fix it anymore?" The question hung in the air like a plea too big for any talk show script. The host's eyes glistened. Keanu's chest rose and fell, visibly moved. Alexandra felt the words reach into the deepest part of her, the part that remembered every goodbye she hadn't known was a goodbye. Keanu spoke first, his voice quieter than the microphones were designed for. "I'm sorry about your dad," he said, and it didn't sound like a celebrity line. It sounded like a man who knew something about sudden loss. "I can't pretend to have an answer big enough for that, but I do know it's never too late to let love change you." Maria frowned a little, confused. "What do you mean?" He thought for a moment, searching for words that wouldn't sound like a slogan. "You can't go back and say those things to him," he said gently, "but you can say them forward. You can tell other people you love them sooner. You can be braver with the truth in your next conversation, your next relationship, your next goodbye. That's a way of honoring him that time can't take from you." He looked at the photograph, then back at her. "Guilt tries to freeze us. Love tries to move us. Let him move you." The studio was utterly still. Alexandra felt something click quietly into place inside her. This was what had always been true about him beneath the shyness and fear. His deepest instinct was kindness. Even now, when he was wrung out emotionally, he had turned toward a stranger's pain with gentleness rather than defensiveness. She rose from the couch without quite realizing she was doing it. The host blinked, then stood too. "Do you mind if I?" she asked the crew, gesturing vaguely toward the front row. No one stopped her. The cameras swiveled to follow as she stepped down off the stage in her black dress, crossing the small gap to where Maria stood. Up close, Maria looked stunned, almost apologetic for taking up this much space. "I didn't mean to," she started, but Alexandra opened her arms, and the younger woman collapsed into a shaking hug. The audience exhaled as one, the tension breaking into a soft murmur of shared emotion. "I know that ache," Alexandra whispered into her hair, not caring that microphones might pick it up. "The words you can't go back and say, I know what it's like to carry them around like they're stuck under your skin." She pulled back enough to look her in the eyes. "But listen to me, your I'm sorry and thank you still matter. Say them out loud when you light a candle, when you look at his photo, when something reminds you of him. Love is not limited by who's in the room." Maria nodded, sobbing. "I just don't know how to forgive myself." Alexandra's gaze softened with a tenderness that came from hard-won experience. "Start by forgiving the version of you who didn't know how little time there was," she said. "You were human, just like I was when I kept waiting for him." She glanced back at Keanu, then at Maria, "to say the things I needed to hear. We all think we have more time. When we learn, we don't. That realization can either break us or teach us how to live differently." She squeezed Maria's hands, then turned slightly so her voice carried to the whole room. "That's what tonight is for me," she said. "Not a reunion, not a headline. It's a reminder that silence is its own kind of cruelty. We think we're protecting people by not telling them the hard, honest thing. But what we're really doing is stealing their chance to respond, to choose, to grow with us." On stage, Keanu watched her, his expression open, humbled. This was the woman he had once been terrified to be fully seen by, the one who could stand in a room full of strangers, bleeding truth with grace. He felt both unworthy and profoundly grateful to share this space with her again. Alexandra gently guided Maria back into her seat with one last embrace, then walked slowly to the stage. Each step felt like a choice. She could keep this night filed under closure, a powerful, painful chapter ending with lesson learned and life moving on separately. Or she could recognize that courage came in many forms, and that sometimes the bravest thing wasn't walking away or even forgiving. It was staying present in the tension long enough to see what might be built from it. She sat down beside him again. The host wisely said nothing. The audience waited, breath held. "You asked if I was willing to take the first step," she said, turning to Keanu. "But I think you already did when you chose honesty over image, so here's mine." She inhaled, feeling her heart race. "I forgive you." A quiet wave went through the room, too deep to be called a cheer. His eyes filled instantly, and he didn't try to blink it away. "I don't deserve that," he whispered. "I know," she replied softly, a tiny smile lifting one corner of her mouth. "That's what makes it forgiveness instead of a transaction." She let that land, then continued. "But forgiving you doesn't mean forgetting who I am now. I can't go back to the woman who would have thrown her whole life aside just to make sure you were okay. I won't." Her tone was firm but kind. "If there's a path forward, it has to honor both of us, who we were and who we've become." He nodded, the humility in his face almost luminous. "Then let it be a new story," he said. "One where I don't hide behind good intentions, where I show up when it's messy, where I do the work without expecting you to carry the weight for both of us." He hesitated, then added, "I don't know exactly what that looks like yet. I just know I'm done running from the people I love." She studied him for a long moment. This wasn't the trembling boy man she had known, overwhelmed by the size of his own shadow. This was someone older, tired perhaps, but finally willing to live without the safety of half-truths. She didn't mistake his vulnerability for a promise. She knew now that real change was measured in consistent choices, not grand speeches. But speeches mattered, too, especially when they cracked open the door to a different future. "I'm not ready to define us," she said. "Friendship, partnership, something in between, I don't know. What I am ready for is a conversation that doesn't end when the cameras stop." She held his gaze. "If you want that too, we can start there, slowly, carefully, honestly." The corner of his mouth lifted, not in relief exactly, but in a kind of quiet awe. "I'd be honored," he replied, "even if all we ever rebuild is a friendship that's finally based on the truth." The host exhaled audibly, a smile breaking through the emotion on his face. "I think I speak for everyone here when I say, this is not where we thought tonight would go," he said. The audience laughed softly, still wiping their eyes. "But I'm very, very glad it did." He looked back at the camera. "If you're watching this at home and there's someone you need to call, someone you need to forgive or tell the truth to, maybe tonight's the night you stop waiting for a perfect moment and just be human." Applause rose, not the wild, frenzied kind reserved for punchlines and stunts, but something warmer, deeper. People stood without quite realizing they were standing. Maria clapped with her photograph pressed to her chest, tears drying on her cheeks but eyes shining with a fragile new hope. As the band played them into the final segment, the show technically went on, but something fundamental had shifted. The jokes that followed were softer, the laughter tinged with relief. Every now and then, the cameras caught Keanu and Alexandra exchanging a small, private glance. Not the charged look of a couple rekindling a tabloid romance, but the tentative, respectful gaze of two people trying to build a new bridge over old ruins. Later offstage, when the cameras were finally off and the crew was packing up, they found themselves alone for the first time all night. The dressing room hallway buzzed faintly with distant voices, but between them there was a quieter stillness. "Thank you," he said, hands tucked into his pockets without any of the old deflection. "For not destroying me, for not walking out the second the show ended." She smiled, softer than the ones she'd given the cameras. "You did that work yourself," she answered. "You faced it. That's courage. It doesn't erase what happened, but it changes what happens next." There was a pause, the kind that once would have swallowed them. This time she stepped into it with a small, steady offering. "Coffee?" she asked, "in a place with terrible lighting and no microphones." His laugh was quiet, disbelieving, grateful. "That sounds perfect," he said. They walked toward the exit together, not touching, not promising anything grand. Just two people choosing for the first time not to let fear dictate the shape of their connection. Outside, the night air was cool against the heat of the studio's memories. Fans waited behind barricades, cameras ready, shouts already rising. Before they stepped into view, Alexandra stopped and turned to him. "One condition," she said. "Name it," he replied. "No more disappearing," she said simply. "If it gets hard, say it's hard. If you're scared, say you're scared. If you don't know what you feel, say that too. Just stay in the room with me, even when it's uncomfortable." He met her gaze, and this time his answer was immediate, no hesitation. "I can do that," he said. "I may fumble it, I'll probably say the wrong thing sometimes, but I won't vanish again. That's a promise I'm willing to be held to." She nodded, accepting, not as a guarantee, but as a beginning. Then they stepped out into the flashing lights, side by side, not as a perfect couple or a resolved fairy tale, but as two imperfect humans choosing courage over comfort, truth over silence, and presence over the illusion of safety. And somewhere in living rooms and hospital rooms and tiny apartments around the world, people watched the replay of that night and reached for their phones, their parents, their partners, their friends, suddenly aware that the words they'd been waiting for might never come, and that they didn't have to wait to be kind, to be brave, to be honest. The show ended hours ago, but for countless strangers carrying their own unfinished stories, the real beginning started right there.